What's the most painful part of any musician's job? Chasing payments, drunks in the crowd, cable dying just as you're running late and have to start a gig. All valid points, but for me the biggest pain is setup. So let's talk about how to turbocharge your live looping or one-man band setup. Let me show you how I set up all this gear in 15 minutes. And it's taken me over 30 years of gigging for the little light bulb to click and try and make it as efficient as possible and minimize time lost during setup, pack up and resetting up at home, packing up at home. And it really boils down to 4 areas that you need to look at to really turbocharge this process. And stick around till the end. I'll give you 2 bonus tips as well that you may not have thought of. So let's get into it. So the first point might sound really obvious, but you really want to analyze your setup and look at what you can consolidate. And this will be a balance between what is practical as a performer and what is simplified for setup and pack up. Now you might like to have your looper or some effect unit over here, and you might like to have your mixer over there, which might work for you great when you're performing. But then when you're setting up, does that mean you need to set up another stand over there or get a chair or get something to set up your mixer? And it means you've got to run a bunch of cables over there as well. I used to think a pedal board was only for guitarists. And it was only last year, after getting frustrated at all the time I had to spend plugging in all my units, I started to think outside the box and thought, why not get a pedal board? I wasn't able to find a pedal board that would suit me, so I ended up making one, just with some plywood. Now, a pedal board is a great idea, and it's not just for guitarists. It's just all about consolidating as many units as you can on one area. You can have things like your power board. If you have any power conditioners, DI boxes, mixers. As you can see, I have my piano sustain, 2 separate controller pedals for my loopers and my vocal effects, my 2 vocal effects units on there. I have a mixer, DI box, a power board, and even a power pack that powers some of those devices. The other thing that's nifty about this power board is as well that I leave half the things plugged in. So rather than having to plug in every single unit, 2/3 of everything is already plugged in. Now, some of you might think a mixer down on the floor, that's not very practical. How am I going to adjust the volume? If you think about it, if you're doing gigs on a regular basis, you would have a pretty good idea of where your volumes need to be. And there's just maybe a slight adjustment of your master volume, which you might do maybe a couple of times throughout the night. I find that once I set up my sound, I do a test, check the volume, I don't need to touch it again. So by putting it on my pedal board on the floor, there's a whole bunch of cables there that I don't have to plug in and unplug every time. And remember, it's unpack at home, it's set up at the gig, unpack at the gig and set up again at home if you practice. So that's 4 times for every 1 gig. That adds up to a lot of time. One issue that you have to be careful is you don't want to have connections coming out of your mixer that stick up because when you put them in a bag or some sort of transportation device, these are going to get a lot of friction and are going to break very quickly. You can get a lot of these right angle connections for instrument jacks, microphone leads, even power cords for speakers and other devices. Get the right angle ones so that again it doesn't stick up, and in transport you're not damaging the cables. And that way you find a large chunk of electrical instrument mic cables already plugged in and stay plugged in. So when you get to your gig, you take them out and you're not plugging in all these things. Massive time saver, you'll find. The second thing that's really important to nail down is your mix. I mentioned before that I've got my mixer down on my pedal board. You really shouldn't have to adjust your mixer if it's just you as a soloist, one-man band, live looper, or even if it's a duo. You might have to tweak their volume just at the start of the gig, but you shouldn't have to adjust things too much. You should be able to go through the whole night with maybe just a change in the main volume. So if you practice at home with your PA setup, listen to what works for you. Record yourself at a gig as well, and you'll hear back, oh hang on, my vocals are too loud or too soft, adjust them. Learn to recognize where your knobs or faders should be on your mixer, on your piano, on your loopers, drum machines, whatever instruments you use, keep it consistent. The other thing I do is on my mixer, I'll put a little pen mark, where is my ideal gain for each of the instruments I have plugged into there. One little trick that I've done is I try and keep as many instruments with the knob exactly halfway. My piano, my looper, my Groovebox, they're all exactly halfway. So when I get to a gig, if they've moved and adjusted something, I'll look at them, I'll set them on half, and that way I know on my mixer, the settings will always be the same. So the only thing that really requires a bit of adjustment is the volume on my mixer. Normally the volume on my speakers, I know where they need to be. So all I do is I play with the master gain on my mixer. And there will be some venues where they might ask you to plug into their PA. So make sure that you have the facilities, whether it be some adapters, some extra cables you have to get to connect to a PA at a venue if it's required of you. Number 3, and this is a biggie that's taken me over 30 years.
Make my own multi-cores.
If I had stereo cables running out of my piano, I always used to have two leads, a left and a right. What if I just grab some electrical tape and just join it together at several spots? So now instead of having to roll it up and pack up two cables, I do one, a dual cable. And that got me on to thinking, why not create my own multi-cores, where they batch a whole bunch of cables together from one end to another. But usually they're the same length cable with the same connections on one end, which would be on the mixer, and then that might go to a amplifier or something like that. I don't have the money to get all these custom cables made, as most musicians probably wouldn't, but look at your setup and see what can you consolidate. So here's one of 3 homemade multi-cores that I've made with just a bit of electrical tape. Power for my Roland Groovebox. Audio that goes into my mixer for my Roland Groovebox. They're just connected together with a bit of electrical tape. This is the exact point where it needs to be, where it gives power to my Groovebox. Right next to it is a MIDI in, so I was able to set them and muck about to find the exact right place for them. If I move along, then I get to the audio out from the Groovebox, and then across the shelf I have my looper, and that plugs in at the perfect spot to the MIDI out of my looper. It's not the prettiest. Well, this one for example, which goes to my looper. Control cable into my looper, power for my looper, microphone in for my looper, keyboard in for my looper, and audio out from my looper into my mixer. And a little in between out of my keyboard that runs to my looper. And then that all goes down to my mixer, which gives me power to the looper and also audio inputs from my loop station. It saves massive amounts of time, especially when you're doing 2 or 3 looping gigs a week. And speaking of getting custom-made cables, the more cables you start to accumulate, the more you realize how much they weigh. This doesn't look like very much, but it does start adding up. So the other thing I've started doing is buying cables to the exact size I need, or as close as possible. Don't use a 3-meter cable if you only need a 2-meter or a 1-meter cable. Don't underestimate the value of cables, especially when you've got like 30 cables. They add weight to your setup, and it's harder when you're carrying it around and stuff. So you want to make life as easy as possible. So I've been able to shave a couple of kilos off my setup, a bit easier on my back. By the way, if you're wondering, oh, that's a pretty snazzy t-shirt. These are my own custom designs, and they are available in several colors. There's a link down below if you want to get yourself one. And there's a Piano Girl version as well, along with a bunch of other cool designs for pianists and general musicians. Number 4, invest in the right cases and bags. Again, ask yourself, what can you pack into the same unit? Before I designed my pedal board, I looked to see what bags were available, and I settled on a gator case that was big enough to house my pedal board with all the cables plugged in, and also my looper and my Groovebox. So they all fit neatly into this bag, and I even leave a space on top for a power board and a couple of extra bits and pieces. So not only does it protect my gear, but it also saves time at the gig, because if you've got 5 bags you've got to move back and forth, this takes time. If you can fit 5 bags into 1 or 2, you're saving time and saving energy to enjoy at the gig rather than lugging back and forth. You'd probably have a couple of speaker stands, mic stands, then you probably have a couple of stands for phone cameras and whatever else, might be lights even. So I keep all the stands that I use for the gigs in a bag, and when I'm home I have another setup to minimize the chance of me forgetting a stand, and saves time as well. My next step is also to get a custom case for this made, where I can just take the lid off and all this is set up ready to go. The other gear that I got myself, which is really invaluable, is this little beach style trolley, let's call it. This little portable unit I got from a hardware store, and I checked the rating so that it can hold my piano and a bunch of gear. At most, in 2 trips, I can carry all my gear from where I've parked my car to the stage where I'm performing at. Great on my wrists, great on my back, great on my mental health. And you look professional when you walk into a gig. You've got everything organised, people go, this guy knows what he's doing. Improves your chances of getting booked again. A couple of quick bonus tips. 1, if possible, try and carry a spare of every different cable that you need, or at least some adapters for a worst case scenario that can convert from a, say, microphone lead to a instrument cable, a spare transformer if you can. I always try and carry 1 spare of everything, or the ability to improvise connections. So something really silly, but carrying a headphone jack allows me the opportunity in a worst case scenario to turn this into an instrument lead. So once you've plugged everything in and you think you're good to go, important to always do a quick line check of absolutely everything in your system. It's something that you don't want to discover as you've started your set. So check everything, check your looper, check your drum machines, check your piano, check any effects, anything that turns on and off, check everything before you start. So then once you know everything's good to go, you can go grab a drink or relax for a few minutes, hopefully, before you start your set. The other little tip which I find really useful is it's really hard to check what volume you're going to be playing at. So what I like to do is I like to play some music on my iPhone or your phone, run that through your system, check it to a level that you think is appropriate for the venue you're playing at. So then when you adjust your mix, it's consistent with the volume of the music you'll play in the background. It's one great way to make sure you're not too high or too low. If you got value out of this video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe and hit the bell notification, because I will be posting lots more content on how to become a better musician and things I've learned in the 30+ years I've had performing. Next up on the rank will be a video on how to get more gigs, especially in today's post-COVID world, and 10 tips to take you from amateur to a professional musician. Let me know what you thought of the video in the comments below. I'd love to hear your input. Anything you do different, anything that you do to speed up your setup. Love to hear about it. Take care of yourself and your music. I'll see you soon. Bye.